They say money and crime go hand in hand, but in America there are families who have turned that equation into an empire, families whose names are whispered in the streets, whose fortunes are built on power, hustle, and survival. These aren't just individuals, but dynasties. Black families who rose from the underground world of crime to live in luxury, shaping their communities in ways both feared and respected. Today, we're counting down the richest criminal black families in the United States who lived, and in some cases still live, lives of unimaginable wealth and influence. 5. The Chambers Brothers. Net worth, estimated $50 to $60 million. Detroit in the 1980s was a city in chaos. Factories closed, unemployment soared, and crack cocaine swept through the streets like wildfire. Enter the Chambers Brothers, 4 siblings from Arkansas who built one of the most profitable crack empires the country had ever seen. They introduced the crack house model, turning abandoned homes into factories of addiction. At their height, their network pulled in hundreds of thousands of dollars a week. The money transformed their lives. Flashy cars, designer suits, gold chains, they lived the archetypal gangster dream. But like so many criminal empires, their rise was matched with a brutal fall. In 1988, a series of raids led to life sentences for several of the brothers. Still, the Chambers name is remembered as the family that reshaped Detroit's underworld and proved just how much wealth could be made from America's darkest epidemic. 4. The Black Mafia Family, BMF. Net worth, $100 million at its height. When people talk about black criminal dynasties, one name dominates: BMF, founded by brothers Demetrius Big Meech and Terry Southwest T. Flannery in the late 1980s. This Atlanta-based empire grew into a nationwide cocaine distribution network. By the early 2000s, they controlled an estimated $270 million operation stretching from Los Angeles to Atlanta, Detroit to Miami. But what set BMF apart wasn't just the drugs, it was the lifestyle. Big Meech turned the crew into cultural icons, rubbing shoulders with rappers, throwing million-dollar parties, and driving fleets of Bentleys and Ferraris. They blurred the line between the underworld and hip-hop, inspiring songs, music videos, and eventually a hit TV series. Today, even though the brothers faced federal convictions, the BMF legacy is cemented as one of the most influential and wealthiest black crime families America has ever seen. 3. The Supreme Team. Net worth, estimated $100 million. Queens, New York, 1980s. At the height of the crack epidemic, when entire neighborhoods were being reshaped by the sudden flood of cocaine, one name carried both fear and respect: the Supreme Team. Founded and led by Kenneth Supreme McGriff, the crew transformed South Jamaica, Queens, into their own fortress. Every block, every corner, every dealer owed allegiance to Supreme's network, which operated with military precision. Unlike smaller crews that came and went, the Supreme Team was organized, disciplined, and unrelenting. They didn't just sell drugs, they built an empire, with distribution channels that ensured their product dominated the streets. The wealth they accumulated was staggering. By some accounts, their crack and cocaine operations were generating hundreds of thousands of dollars every single day, translating into hundreds of millions in profits over the course of their reign. But what set Supreme apart from many of his peers was the way he carried himself. Where others flaunted their wealth with reckless abandon, Supreme cultivated an image of sophistication. He was known to ride in limousines, step out in finely tailored suits, and project the aura of a businessman rather than just a street kingpin. This carefully crafted persona gave him influence that stretched far beyond the blocks he controlled. Supreme's reach extended into the worlds of music, entertainment, and even Hollywood. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, long after his peak years in Queens, he was connected to rap moguls and influential figures in the recording industry. His ties to Murder Incorporated. Records and figures like Irv Gotti blurred the lines between the underworld and mainstream pop culture. He even financed a film project, seeking to legitimize his presence in the entertainment industry and immortalize his name in a medium far removed from street corners. This crossover between crime and culture gave the Supreme Team an enduring legacy, symbolizing how the underworld could shape not only local neighborhoods, but national trends. On the streets, however, the Supreme Team was infamous for its ruthlessness. They enforced discipline with extreme measures, ensuring loyalty through both fear and reward. Their hierarchy resembled a corporation, with lieutenants, enforcers, and dealers all working within a system that maximized profit and minimized disorder. At the same time, their dominance created a sense of inevitability in South Jamaica. The Supreme Team wasn't just a gang, it was the environment. If you lived in Queens during those years, you couldn't escape their shadow. Eventually, the law caught up. Federal indictments, lengthy prison sentences, and unrelenting pressure from law enforcement dismantled the operation. Yet the legend of the Supreme Team never faded. In the streets of Queens, they are still remembered as the crew that defined an era, their name synonymous with both the destruction and the power of the crack age. For many, they became the ultimate example of how a black family-run syndicate could rise to unimaginable wealth and influence in the heart of New York City. 2. The Jones family. Net worth estimated $200 million. Unlike many crews that burned bright and fast, the Jones family of Philadelphia played the long game. Led by the legendary Little Melvin Williams, whose life partly inspired The Wire, the Jones family and their allies didn't just chase quick money. They built a structure meant to last. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, their heroin distribution networks quietly flooded the East Coast, and while other groups drew headlines with violence and chaos, the Jones family thrived in the shadows. Their empire was defined not only by the scale of drugs they moved, but by the sophistication with which they managed their wealth. What separated the Jones family from countless other crime syndicates was their foresight. While many dealers spent recklessly on cars, jewelry, and fast lifestyles, the Jones crew understood that true power meant turning dirty money into clean assets. They laundered millions through nightclubs that doubled as community hotspots, car dealerships that gave them legitimacy, and sprawling real estate holdings that grew in value year after year. Every dollar that passed through their hands was carefully funneled into something permanent, something that could not be seized as easily as a stash house or a street corner. Law enforcement knew they were powerful, but the money trail was deliberately blurred, buried under layers of business fronts, straw owners, and cash-heavy operations. The Jones family became icons of a new kind of wealth in America's underworld. They weren't content with just street money. They wore custom-tailored suits that gave them the appearance of businessmen, not gangsters. They lived in luxurious mansions in the suburbs, far removed from the neighborhoods where their narcotics were sold. Their driveways gleamed with Cadillacs, Mercedes, and Lincolns, while inside their homes, lavish interiors reflected a taste for the finer things. Imported furniture, crystal chandeliers, and expensive art. To outsiders, they looked more like corporate executives than drug lords. But beyond appearances, the Jones family left behind a model that few in their era could replicate: the concept of building an intergenerational criminal dynasty. Their wealth wasn't just about immediate gratification, it was about laying the groundwork for future generations to inherit businesses, properties, and investments. In this way, they blurred the line between the underworld and legitimate society, showing that organized black families in America could accumulate not just fast fortunes, but long-term transferable assets. By the height of their power, the Jones family was whispered about as one of the richest black crime dynasties of their time. Their empire stood as proof that strategy could rival violence and patience could outlast chaos. They were feared on the streets, respected in business circles, and remembered as pioneers who demonstrated how crime, when calculated and controlled, could evolve into something resembling a dynasty. 1. The Barksdale Organization. Net worth estimated $250 million. At number 1, we return again to Baltimore. The Barksdale Organization, led by Nathan "Body" Barksdale, was one of the most notorious and powerful drug trafficking rings in American history. During the 1980s and 1990s, they turned West Baltimore into their empire, controlling entire neighborhoods block by block. The operation wasn't just about drugs, it was about dominance. The Barksdales ran their business with a level of organization that rivaled corporate structures, with lieutenants, enforcers, and street-level dealers all answering to the top. Heroin and cocaine flowed through their network in staggering quantities, generating millions of dollars every single month. Their influence was so overwhelming that they became the real-life inspiration for HBO's The Wire, forever immortalizing their story in American culture. But the story of the Barksdales is more than just a tale of crime, it's a study in contradictions. On one hand, they lived like kings. Witnesses and investigators described fleets of luxury cars cruising Baltimore's streets, from Cadillacs to Mercedes-Benzes. Jewelry worth millions glittered at parties, and their homes in the suburbs stood as palaces built on the back of drug profits. Expensive suits, lavish vacations, and nights in exclusive clubs became part of their image. They were not merely dealers, they styled themselves as urban royalty, projecting power and prestige to anyone who crossed their path. Yet on the other hand, they were deeply embedded in their community. Despite the violence and devastation that came with the drug trade, the Barksdales were also known for giving back. They sponsored local basketball tournaments, hosted cookouts, and put money into helping struggling families in West Baltimore. For many in their neighborhoods, the Barksdales were a paradox, both feared and respected. They were seen as protectors as much as predators, men who brought wealth and opportunity into places where poverty and neglect had been the norm for generations. This dual identity cemented their legend. To law enforcement, they were ruthless crime bosses who ordered hits, enforced loyalty through fear, and expanded their drug network without mercy. To the streets, they were symbols of ambition, proof that even in the face of systemic poverty and racism, it was possible to rise and command an empire. It was this mix of brutality and generosity, crime and charisma that made their story resonate far beyond Baltimore. At their peak, the Barksdale Organization's empire was valued at over $250 million. But that number only tells part of the story. Their cultural influence, through the inspiration of The Wire, turned them into household names, representing not just Baltimore, but the story of America's urban underworld. They are remembered as the richest criminal black family in the United States, not only for the money they made, but for the legacy they left. A legacy that blurs the line between myth and reality, between villains and kings, power, money, and legacy. For these families, crime was not just survival, it was empire building. They rose from the shadows of poverty and racism to create dynasties that rivaled legitimate billionaires. Some fell in flames, others transitioned into culture, and some still live in whispers today. But their stories remind us of a simple truth. In America, even crime can build a dynasty.